Case 1. Valerie Cincinelli. In April 2019, Valerie Cincinelli, a decorated NYPD officer, became the center of a chilling FBI investigation.
Like, I can't really believe this. I'm a cop. Like, I can't believe this.
You are a cop?
Yes.
Where? In the city?
Yes.
For weeks, federal agents had been listening as Cincinelli, who had sworn to protect the public, secretly plotted a double murder. Her target was not just her estranged husband, Isaiah Carvajalo Jr., but also the 15-year-old daughter of her boyfriend, whom she saw as a hindrance to her relationship. In a cold and calculated manner, she sought to arrange their deaths, offering a payment of $7,000 to a hitman. Cincinelli's story began in 2007 when she joined the New York Police Department. At first, she appeared to be a model officer, working in Queens and handling domestic violence cases. She gained a reputation as an advocate for victims. However, behind the uniform, her personal life was unraveling. Her marriage to Isaiah Carvajalo Jr. was falling apart, with a bitter divorce and a custody battle over their child becoming increasingly hostile. Meanwhile, Cincinelli was dating a car dealership owner from Long Island, whose teenage daughter she saw as an obstacle in her life. Rather than resolving these issues through legal means, Cincinelli decided to take matters into her own hands. She asked her boyfriend to help her find a hitman, plotting to have her husband killed. But the situation took a darker turn when she insisted that her boyfriend's daughter also be murdered. The teenage girl she believed stood in the way of her relationship. What Cincinelli didn't know was that her boyfriend had already contacted the FBI. He agreed to wear a wire and record their conversations. Over the next few weeks, the FBI gathered hours of damning evidence. Cincinelli discussed the logistics of the murders with chilling detachment, even complaining about the high cost of killing a child. Her words were cold and calculated, revealing the depth of her cruelty. On May 17, 2019, the FBI staged a fake crime scene to convince Cincinelli that the murders had been carried out. They pretended to be the hired killers and called her boyfriend, claiming the job was done. Cincinelli believed them. When the FBI raided her home, they found texts and messages detailing the planned murders, including her discussions about payments and the execution of the plot. Cincinelli's arrest made headlines across the country, with shock and disbelief spreading through the public. As a police officer, she was sworn to uphold the law, yet she had plotted to take 2 lives. Her defense team tried to argue that she was manipulated and that her words had been taken out of context, but the evidence was overwhelming. She pled guilty to obstruction of justice in 2021, and the murder for hire charges were dropped. Cincinelli was sentenced to 48 months in federal prison, and she resigned from the NYPD. Her case shocked the nation, and many felt that her sentence was too light for someone who had planned not 1 but 2 murders, including that of a child. Even after serving her sentence and being released in 2024, Valerie Cincinelli's name remains synonymous with betrayal, corruption, and the darkest side of human nature. Her story serves as a haunting reminder that even those entrusted to protect the vulnerable can fall into the depths of evil. Case 2. Amber Guyger. On the evening of September 6, 2018, in Dallas, Texas, 26-year-old Botham Jean was enjoying a quiet night at home, eating ice cream and unwinding after his day. A dedicated accountant and churchgoer, Jean had no criminal history or enemies. However, his peaceful night was tragically cut short when Amber Guyger, a 4-year veteran of the Dallas Police Department, mistakenly entered his apartment and shot him. Guyger, who had worked a long shift that evening, claimed she had mistakenly entered the wrong floor and walked into what she thought was her own apartment. She found the door ajar and assumed she was dealing with a burglary. Believing her life was in danger, she drew her weapon and fired 2 shots, fatally wounding Jean, who was unarmed and sitting on his couch. Guyger later called 911, crying and admitting her tragic mistake, but the public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Initially, the Dallas Police Department treated the incident as an accident. However, as details of the case emerged, many felt that Jean, a man peacefully sitting in his own home, posed no threat. To the public, this wasn't a mere mistake. It was a reckless act of negligence. The case gained national attention, raising questions about police accountability and race. Guyger was initially charged with manslaughter, but the charge was later upgraded to murder. The trial began in September 2019, and the courtroom became a stage for one of the most closely watched police trials in recent years. Guyger's defense centered on her exhaustion, confusion, and human error, claiming that she had been overly tired after a long shift. They also argued that she feared for her life when she saw a man in her apartment. Prosecutors, however, pointed out that there were numerous signs that Jean's apartment was not Guyger's, including a bright red welcome mat and different furniture arrangement, and that Guyger acted recklessly in assuming the worst. Text messages between Guyger and a fellow officer painted a picture of her being distracted, neglectful, and possibly unfit to make such a life or death decision. The emotional testimony from Jean's mother, Allison Jean, emphasized the deep personal loss of her son, a devout Christian and promising young professional. On October 1, 2019, the jury found Guyger guilty of murder, sentencing her to 10 years in prison. The verdict shocked many, with some arguing the sentence was too lenient and others claiming she didn't deserve the murder conviction. A poignant moment during the trial went viral when Jean's younger brother, Brant, forgave Guyger in court and asked to hug her. In the years following the trial, Guyger's appeal was denied and her conviction was upheld. In 2024, her parole was denied and she remains in prison, with her next parole review scheduled for 2026. The case of Amber Guyger continues to be a powerful symbol of the complexities surrounding police accountability, race, and justice. Case 3, Stephanie Lazarus. On February 24, 1986, in Van Nuys, California, Sherry Rasmussen, a 29-year-old director of nursing at Glendale Adventist Medical Center, was found dead in her home. She had been brutally beaten, bitten, and shot 3 times. Initially, the crime scene suggested a batched burglary, but further investigation revealed a more personal motive. The true killer was Stephanie Lazarus, an LAPD detective and the ex-girlfriend of Sherry's husband, John Ruetten. Sherry had recently married John, a man she deeply loved, but their relationship was overshadowed by Lazarus, who still harbored feelings for him after their breakup. Lazarus's obsession with John persisted, and friends recalled her constant efforts to insert herself into his life even after his marriage to Sherry. Sherry herself confided her concerns to her father, expressing fear of Lazarus, who had even threatened her at work, saying, "If I can't have John, nobody else will." On the morning of February 24th, John left for work as usual. By the time he returned home that evening, he discovered Sherry's lifeless body on the living room floor. She had been violently attacked, beaten, bitten, and shot 3 times with a .38 caliber revolver. A bite mark on her arm was one of the key pieces of evidence. Though the crime scene had been staged to look like a robbery, detectives quickly noticed that the violence was too personal and targeted to be a mere burglary. Despite these red flags, the LAPD didn't suspect Lazarus, as she was one of their own. For over 2 decades, the case remained unsolved, filed away amidst rising crime rates in Los Angeles. Meanwhile, Lazarus continued her career in the LAPD, rising to the rank of detective in the art theft unit. To the public, she was a respected officer, charming, successful, and dedicated to her work. However, beneath the surface, she carried the secret of her involvement in Sherry's murder. In 2005, advances in DNA testing reopened cold cases. The bite mark on Sherry's body, previously overlooked, was now analyzed. The DNA matched Lazarus's, confirming her guilt. Investigators collected DNA from Lazarus's discarded cup, and it was a match to the evidence found at the scene. Lazarus's involvement was undeniable. On June 5, 2009, Lazarus was brought in for questioning under the pretense of needing her help with an unrelated case. As detectives confronted her with the evidence, her calm demeanor cracked. The interrogation footage, in which Lazarus realizes she is about to be arrested, became a viral sensation. In 2012, Lazarus was convicted of first-degree murder. The prosecution presented a compelling case, emphasizing her motive of jealousy and revenge. Despite the defense's claims of evidence mishandling, the jury convicted her. On March 8, 2012, she was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. For years, Sherry's family had suspected Lazarus's involvement, but no one listened until the truth was revealed through the power of DNA. Lazarus, once a respected detective, is now serving time for her crime. Her fall from grace serves as a stark reminder of how a badge can be used to hide the darkest secrets. Case 4. Antoinette Frank. On March 4, 1995, in New Orleans, a quiet Vietnamese restaurant became the scene of a chilling tragedy. That night, death entered the restaurant, cloaked in a police uniform. This wasn't just a robbery. It was a shocking act of betrayal. Antoinette Frank, a police officer, turned her weapon on her own partner and 2 innocent civilians, all driven by greed. This is the disturbing story of Antoinette Frank, one of New Orleans' most despised officers. Antoinette Renee Frank joined the New Orleans Police Department in 1993, seen as a promising recruit. Young and ambitious, she was one of the few black female officers in the department, a milestone in a city with strained police-community relations. However, her colleagues quickly noticed troubling behavior. Frank was reckless and struggled with basic police work. Most concerning was her involvement with the criminal world, forming a relationship with 18-year-old drug dealer Rogers Lacaze. Frank allowed Lacaze into restricted areas, even calling him her partner. By 1995, Frank's financial troubles deepened. Buried in debt, She and Lacaze devised a plan to rob the Kim An Vietnamese restaurant where Frank worked part-time as a security guard. The Wu family, who owned the restaurant, trusted Frank, treating her like family. But that night, she was there for betrayal, not protection. Around midnight, Frank unlocked the door and let Lacaze inside. Armed and masked, the two stormed in with guns drawn. Off-duty officer Ronnie Williams, Frank's colleague, was guarding the restaurant. Before he could react, Frank shot him in the head, killing him instantly. The Wu family, who knew and trusted Frank, were forced to the ground. Despite their trust, Frank and Lacaze opened fire, killing 17-year-old Harvu and 24-year-old W. Lu. Only their older sister, Chow, survived by hiding. The crime scene was chaotic, with blood spilling across the floor. Frank, a police officer sworn to protect, had just murdered her own colleague and 2 innocent civilians. It was a betrayal that rocked the city. News of the killings spread quickly, leaving the city in shock. Frank's actions, driven by greed, shattered the trust the community had in their police force. During the trial, prosecutors painted Frank as manipulative and ruthless, claiming she had masterminded the robbery. Frank and Lacaze were sentenced to death. Nearly 3 decades later, Frank remains on death row in Louisiana, one of the few women in the state facing execution. Despite several failed appeals, Frank's legacy continues to haunt the New Orleans Police Department, symbolizing the darkest betrayal from within the force.
Case 5. Yvonne Woo. On October 13, 2021, in Brooklyn, New York, the neighborhood of 19th Avenue was disturbed by the sound of rapid gunshots. When officers arrived, they did not find a suspect on the run, but an officer from their own ranks. NYPD officer Yvonne Woo stood calmly outside a house, hands raised and her weapon discarded. Upon being asked what happened, Woo coldly confessed, "I shot them both." The victims were not strangers, but were women Woo had loved: Jenny Lee, her former girlfriend, and Jamie Liang, Lee's new partner. Inside the home, Jamie Liang, 24, was fatally wounded, while Jenny Lee, though badly injured, managed to survive. This was not a random act of violence, but a deeply personal betrayal fueled by obsession, heartbreak, and rage. To understand how a dedicated officer became a murderer, one must look deeper into Woo's history. A 7-year veteran of the NYPD, Woo was known for being quiet, disciplined, and capable. She appeared to be a model officer with no history of misconduct, but beneath her composed exterior, something dangerous was brewing. Woo had been in a long-term relationship with Jenny Lee, a woman she adored and depended on. However, when the relationship began to deteriorate, Woo struggled to let go, becoming increasingly obsessed. In the weeks before the shooting, Lee had begun seeing Jamie Liang, which Woo saw as a betrayal. For someone like Woo, who carried a gun and badge daily, losing control over her emotions was unbearable. That October evening, Woo drove uninvited to Lee's home in Bensonhurst. Inside, Lee was with Jamie Liang. What should have been a peaceful evening quickly turned violent. Woo confronted the two, and in a violent outburst, she drew her service weapon and fired multiple shots. Neighbors reported hearing several gunshots, which rang out like an explosion in the quiet street. Jamie Liang was shot in the chest and died instantly, while Jenny Lee, though wounded, managed to crawl toward the door in a desperate attempt to escape.
Wu then stepped outside, discarded her gun, and calmly awaited the arrival of officers. When they arrived, she confessed without hesitation, stating, "I shot them both." The case shocked the NYPD. Instead of using her training and weapon to protect, Wu used them to settle a personal score. This wasn't corruption. It was an officer who let raw emotion control her actions. In June 2024, Wu pleaded guilty to manslaughter and attempted murder, and in August of that year, she was sentenced to 27 years in prison. The case raised public debates about her sentence, mental health, and the responsibilities of law enforcement officers. For Jenny Lee, the survivor, her life was forever altered. She had to testify against her former partner in court. Jamie Liang's family, on the other hand, was left without closure. Their daughter's life stolen by someone who had sworn to protect. This case deeply impacted public trust in the NYPD. Wu, entrusted with life and death power, had let personal emotions transform her into an executioner. Now, Wu is serving her sentence, a tragic reminder of how jealousy and obsession can turn deadly, especially in the hands of those meant to serve and protect. Case 6. On the cold morning of January 29th, 2022, in Canton, Massachusetts, a quiet suburban street became the scene of a controversial incident that would grab national attention. Boston police officer John O'Keefe was found dead in the snow outside a fellow officer's house. His girlfriend, Karen Reed, a former police officer, was soon accused of his murder. But what started as a tragic death quickly spiraled into a case involving allegations of a cover-up within the Boston Police Department. Karen Reed, a financial analyst, had been in a relationship with O'Keefe, a well-liked 16-year veteran of the Boston Police Department. To their friends, the couple seemed strong and happy, but behind closed doors, tensions were mounting. On January 28th, they went out drinking, leaving a bar together around 12:30 a.m. However, O'Keefe would never make it home. Prosecutors claimed that Reed dropped him off at a party hosted by another officer and, after an argument, drove off recklessly, hitting O'Keefe with her car. They argued that she left him to die in the snow, unconscious and bleeding, instead of seeking help. When O'Keefe's body was discovered, he had multiple injuries, including cuts, bruises, and bite marks, and his clothes were soaked by the cold. The official cause of death was hypothermia and blunt force trauma. Investigators quickly pointed to Reed as the cause, suggesting that she acted in a fit of rage or out of negligence. However, Reed insisted that she was being framed. She claimed that other officers beat O'Keefe inside the house and dragged him outside to cover it up. She argued that her SUV wasn't involved in his death, but that the Boston Police Department itself orchestrated a conspiracy. In court, both sides presented their cases. The prosecution presented forensic evidence, showing photos of O'Keefe's injuries and arguing that the pattern matched a car strike. They also found fragments from Reed's broken taillight and painted her as a drunken, angry woman who lashed out. The defense, however, argued that the evidence was planted and claimed that O'Keefe's injuries were more consistent with a beating than a car accident. They accused both the Canton and Massachusetts State Police of tampering with the investigation, asserting that the case was rigged from the start. Public opinion was divided. Some saw Reed as a jealous lover who couldn't handle rejection, while others believed she was a woman fighting against a corrupt police department. Social media buzzed with discussions, with some calling her guilty and others supporting her claim of innocence.
The trial became more than just a legal battle. It became a struggle for justice and accountability, with protesters gathering outside the courthouse demanding answers. In June 2025, after a lengthy retrial, Reed was acquitted of all major charges, including second-degree murder and manslaughter. However, the case remains a divisive chapter in Boston's history. Reed is viewed by some as a victim of systemic corruption, while others believe she is guilty of O'Keefe's death. What remains clear is that the case raised serious questions about the integrity of the police department and the pursuit of truth, with O'Keefe's tragic death and Reed's ongoing battle for justice continuing to haunt the community. Case 7. Nomia Rosemary Ndlovu. A South African police sergeant led a double life. By day, she wore the uniform of the South African Police Service, patrolling the streets and portraying herself as a protector. By night, she plotted the murders of those closest to her, her boyfriend, relatives, and anyone whose death could result in a life insurance payout. Over the span of 6 years, Ndlovu orchestrated the deaths of 6 people, each murder carefully planned to line her pockets with their insurance money. Ndlovu joined the South African Police Service in 1994, during a time of transition in the country. While outwardly appearing to be a committed officer, colleagues described her as secretive, hiding her personal life from others. What they didn't know was that she was taking out life insurance policies on her loved ones. Her first victim was her cousin, Madala Home, who was found murdered in 2012. His death was initially seen as just another violent crime in South Africa. But when Ndlovu quickly collected a life insurance payout, suspicions began to rise. In 2013, Ndlovu's sister Audrey died mysteriously after falling ill. Ndlovu was again quick to claim the insurance money, but no one suspected the police sergeant who appeared to be grieving. The killings escalated when her boyfriend, Maurice Mabasa, was brutally stabbed over 80 times in 2015. Ndlovu filed for his life insurance policy, which amounted to over 400,000 rand. Publicly, she mourned, but privately, she profited. Her spree didn't end there. Over the next few years, she arranged the deaths of her niece, nephew, and other relatives, each murder disguised as random violence. By 2018, Ndlovu had collected tens of thousands of dollars from the insurance claims. In a final act of desperation, Ndlovu attempted to hire hitmen to kill her elderly mother in 2018, hoping to collect another payout. However, the hitmen turned informants, recording her detailed instructions on how to carry out the murder. These recordings were later played in court and exposed her chilling, detached demeanor as she planned the death of her own mother. This was the key evidence that led to her arrest. Ndlovu's arrest stunned the nation. A police officer sworn to serve and protect had turned into one of South Africa's most notorious serial killers. The media dubbed her the insurance killer. In her 2021 trial, prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence, including insurance documents, bank records, and testimony from the hitmen she tried to hire. Despite her defense's claims of innocence, the evidence was irrefutable. On October 22nd, Ndlovu was convicted of 6 counts of murder, attempted murder, fraud, and defeating the ends of justice. She was sentenced to 6 consecutive life terms in prison, with additional time for the fraud charges.
Throughout the trial, Ndlovu showed little emotion, a coldness that had marked her crimes. She remains incarcerated, her case one of the most shocking betrayals of law enforcement in South African history.
Case 8, Alfreda Fluker. On the night of April 10, 2020, in Birmingham, Alabama, tragedy struck at Germania Park. An unmarked police car sat quietly in the shadows, housing Sergeant Mariah White and his girlfriend, 39-year-old Kenesha Nicole Fuller. Neither of them could have anticipated the horror that was about to unfold. Within moments, gunfire erupted, fatally injuring Fuller and leaving White severely wounded. The shooter, however, was no stranger. It was Detective Alfreda Fluker, a 15-year veteran of the Birmingham Police Department. Known for her dedication in the Crime Reduction Unit, Fluker had built a reputation for handling high-pressure cases. Yet, her personal life was in turmoil. She had been in a volatile relationship with White, which had worsened when he began seeing another woman. Consumed by jealousy and obsession, Fluker tracked White's movements, knowing he was with Fuller that night. Instead of confronting them, Fluker chose a deadly course of action. She opened fire on the car, striking White multiple times and killing Fuller instantly. When first responders arrived, the scene was chaotic. Glass shattered, blood spilled, and White was rushed to the hospital while Fuller was declared dead at the scene. When first responders arrived, the truth quickly emerged. The shooter was one of their own. Fluker, once trusted by her colleagues, was arrested and charged with capital murder and attempted murder. The shockwaves from her arrest rocked the Birmingham Police Department. Chief Patrick Smith publicly expressed the difficulty of the situation, acknowledging the betrayal and emphasizing that no one, not even law enforcement, is above the law. The 2023 trial exposed the full extent of the tragedy. Prosecutors presented ballistic evidence and phone records linking Fluker to the scene, and White testified, identifying her as the shooter. The defense argued that Fluker had snapped in an emotional breakdown, but the jury found her actions too deliberate to be dismissed as a moment of passion. She was convicted of capital murder for Fuller's death and attempted murder for White's injuries. Fluker was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the families involved, justice was served, but the pain lingered. Fuller's family mourned the loss of a vibrant, kind woman, while White was left with emotional and physical scars from the betrayal. The Birmingham Police Department, once proud to have Fluker on their team, now bore the deep wounds of her betrayal. Fluker's story serves as a stark reminder of the dangerous consequences of unchecked emotions. A police officer is trained to protect and serve with integrity, yet Fluker allowed jealousy and obsession to consume her, destroying her career, relationships, and ultimately her freedom. Now imprisoned, she is remembered not for her service to the law, but for the crime she committed. A chilling warning of how destructive obsession can be. Case 9. Laurie Bembenek. In July of 1981, a gunshot shattered the calm of a Milwaukee suburb. 30-year-old Christine Schultz was found dead in her bed, bound and gagged with a single bullet wound to her chest. The murder sent shockwaves through the city, but it was the identity of the prime suspect that captivated the public. Laurie Bembenek,
a former Playboy bunny turned Milwaukee police officer. Laurie Bembenek was born in 1958 in Milwaukee to a Polish-American working-class family. She was the youngest of 3 daughters and stood out for her intelligence and striking beauty. After briefly working as a Playboy bunny at the Milwaukee Playboy Club, she joined the Milwaukee Police Department in 1980, but quickly clashed with the department's culture. Laurie was outspoken, accusing her colleagues of corruption and misconduct, which led to her being dismissed after less than a year. Laurie's personal life also became complicated when she married Fred Schwartz, a Milwaukee police detective who had recently divorced his wife Christine. Their marriage was rocky, and Laurie found herself in conflict not only with Fred's ex-wife, but also with his colleagues. On the night of July 3, 1981, Christine was murdered in her home, and the investigation turned to Laurie as the prime suspect. Prosecutors claimed Laurie had a motive: resentment over Christine's financial ties to Fred, including alimony and child support. They argued that Laurie wanted Christine out of the way to relieve Fred of financial strain. However, the evidence against Laurie was weak. The prosecution relied heavily on questionable witness testimonies. And a key piece of evidence, a pair of green jogging pants found at Laurie's home, was never tested for gunpowder residue. Laurie's defense argued that the pants had been planted by police to frame her. Despite these flaws in the case, Laurie was convicted of first-degree murder in 1982 and sentenced to life in prison at the age of 23. Laurie's story gained national attention, and she became a media sensation. In 1990, she made headlines again by escaping from prison with the help of her fiancé, Dominic Guglielmo. They fled to Canada, where they were captured 3 months later. Her escape turned her into a folk hero for many, and her case was widely viewed as a symbol of a corrupt system. In 1992, Laurie's conviction was overturned due to prosecutorial misconduct. Instead of a retrial, Laurie struck a deal, pleading no contest to second-degree murder in exchange for a reduced sentence. She was released after serving just 10 years in prison. Laurie maintained her innocence, insisting she had been framed by a corrupt police department. Despite the ongoing debate over her guilt or innocence, Laurie's later years were marked by health issues and minor legal troubles. She passed away in 2010 at the age of 52. Her case remains one of the most enduring and controversial in true crime history, sparking discussions on justice, corruption, and media influence.
Case 10. Stephanie Mohr. On the night of September 21, 1995, in Tacoma Park, Maryland, 2 men were spotted climbing onto the roof of a local bakery. Police responded to what appeared to be a burglary in progress. The suspects, Ricardo Mendez and another man, surrendered quickly and were unarmed. However, what followed was an incident that would dramatically impact one officer's career. Stephanie Mohr, a highly respected canine handler with the Prince George's County Police Department, ordered her German Shepherd to attack Mendez despite him having already surrendered. Mohr had earned respect for her work with the canine unit, known for her quick response in dangerous situations. However, on this night, she gave the command to release the dog on a suspect who was not resisting, not fleeing, and was already under control. The dog latched onto Mendez's leg, causing severe injuries. Fellow officers later testified that the situation was under control and that the attack was unnecessary.
At first, the incident didn't make national headlines, but years later, it led to a federal investigation. In 2000, Stephanie Mohr was charged with violating Mendez's civil rights. Prosecutors argued that she intentionally unleashed the dog on a man who had already surrendered, labeling the act as sadistic. They pointed out that the situation was already under control and that the dog's release was unnecessary. Mohr's defense argued that she had acted out of concern for a possible escape and that her decision was a precautionary measure. However, the evidence, including Mendez's injuries and testimony from fellow officers, painted a different picture. In 2001, Mohr was convicted in federal court for depriving Mendez of his civil rights and sentenced to 10 years in prison. The case became a turning point in discussions about police accountability. While some supported her, believing she was unfairly targeted, others saw her conviction as a necessary step to ensure accountability in law enforcement. Throughout her prison sentence, Mohr maintained her innocence, claiming that her only mistake was being in the wrong place at the wrong time. However, Mendez's permanent scars told a different story. Mohr was released in 2011 after serving nearly 10 years in prison. In 2020, she received a presidential pardon, which sparked controversy. For her supporters, it was seen as a rectification of an unjust conviction, while critics argued it undermined efforts to hold law enforcement accountable. Mohr's case remains one of the darkest chapters in Prince George's County police history, not because it was the only example of police misconduct, but because it was the case that finally led to real consequences for an officer's abuse of power. Mohr's actions were not a result of a heated moment. They were a conscious choice to cause harm, which makes her one of the few officers who was held accountable for such actions. They took an oath to serve and protect, but instead they violated it in the most chilling manner. These women weren't just corrupt officers. They were predators cloaked in uniforms, turning their badges into tools of harm and turning trust into violence. Their actions serve as a reminder that the most dangerous criminals don't always lurk in the shadows. They often wear the very uniforms meant to safeguard us. For more stories where power is warped into something sinister, don't forget to subscribe, like, and enable notifications so you're always up to date with what's to come.